Thank you for joining our presentation on Magic, the 5 to unlock the power of employee engagement. We're grateful that you're here with us today. My name is Justin Warner, and I will be moderating our presentation today. Today's presentation qualifies for 1 hour of both HRCI and SHRM credits. For those of you who are participating live, the HRCI and SHRM codes will be emailed to you following the webinar. For those who are participating on demand, please email me at jwarner@decision-wise.com. This webinar will also be available via the DecisionWise podcast channel. If you haven't taken advantage of subscribing to our podcast channel, I highly encourage you to do so. And I'm grateful for our audio team who's made that possible, that this webinar could be available both via the webinar and the podcast. I'm excited to have Dr. Tracy Maylett with us here today.
Justin, thank you. I'm excited to be here.
It's great. Dr. Maylett is the CEO of DecisionWise and author of the book Magic, 5 Keys to Unlock the Power of Employee Engagement. Tracy has a doctorate in organizational change from Pepperdine University and an MBA from Brigham Young University. He's recognized as an expert in organizational change and feedback, as well as employee engagement and employee experience. In addition to the Magic book that we just described, Tracy is the co-author of the book The Employee Experience and a frequent contributor to several business magazines. Again, Tracy, we know your schedule is really busy. Thanks so much for being with us today.
Justin and team, thank you very much. I'm looking forward to this.
Great. So today I'd like to start off our webinar the same way that every single webinar or training begins when we start talking about employee engagement. And that is 7 out of every 8 employees are disengaged in their job. Tracy, let's start talking a little bit about this the sky is falling mentality that we hear about so much. What are your thoughts about this?
I think this is kind of the basis of what we're going to be addressing today, is this very concept. You know, I like the way you started this off, because pretty much every HR presentation that I've been to over the last probably 3 years, if not longer than that, and many of the blogs that I read or many of the articles start off with a statistic similar to this. This is actually a statistic that I've seen, I would say half the time that I see in these presentations. I want to talk about that today, and I'll give kind of a brief overview of what that really means, because this is quite misleading, and I'll tell you the reason why. Let's look at common sense for just a minute. If I'm walking down the hall in any given corporation or any given organization, what this is saying is that I have to pass 7 people before I get to one that's finally engaged. So, I mean, logically, that would say I can move 7 people out of my organization and basically just operate with that one person, because actually those 7 people aren't not just likely to be making a positive contribution, they're probably likely to be making a negative contribution. It doesn't make sense. You can't operate an organization that way. So let's think logically, first of all. Is it really possible that 7 out of your 8 employees are truly disengaged? It just doesn't make sense.
Seems highly unlikely.
Not only unlikely, an organization can't function that way. So intuitively, that doesn't make sense. The second piece, and this is really what I want to address today, is what is engagement? How are we measuring engagement, and what does that look like? So, Justin, with your permission, that's what I'd really like to focus on, a good part of this. The first part is what is engagement.
Yeah.
Okay. So I will give you some honest statistics based on what we have actually seen through research. Now, when I say research, much of the research that was done that said most of your employees are disengaged was based on a fairly small study population. There are some organizations that have done some pretty extensive research, and we respect quite a bit, that kind of contradict this concept, but really identify what engagement is. Let me give you some real statistics that we've been able to come up with. And Justin, you'll point out the database size on this one, right? This was from over 20 million survey responses.
Yeah, for sure. And this is the DecisionWise 2017 database where we got all of these responses. Yeah, definitely over 20 million survey responses.
It's a big database, a big set of data. And here's what we found. While we're not saying 7 out of 8 employees are disengaged, there are some figures that are important to look at. The first one being employee engagement has dropped by 25% in top performers, okay? So these are people based on their performance evaluations and standards and what the organization would say, yes, this is a true star in my organization. As we look at those individuals and look at their engagement scores over, some of these organizations we've been working with for 2 decades, but over the last 3 years, these top performers, their engagement scores have dropped by about 25%. That's alarming. The next one we take a look at is only 57% of employees respond favorably to certain questions. The questions that are related to growth and development within their organization, it's only 57% favorable rating, which means that nearly half of the employees don't feel that they have the opportunity to grow and develop. 47% feel there are few opportunities for advancement in the organization. And then the next one is interesting also, why 90% feel they make a valuable contribution to the organization. 34%, so a third of the employees, don't feel that their work is valued. And 40% don't feel valued themselves as employees.
That's great. So Tracy, we have a lot of organizations on the webinar with us today. They represent a variety of different industries. Do these change or vary based off of industries, or do we see it pretty consistent among industries as well? Oftentimes I hear people say, well, I'm in healthcare, and healthcare is different than everyone else. What does that look like?
That's an interesting concept because statistically speaking, there is variance between the organizations. Realistically speaking, when we look employee to employee, we don't see as much variance. And I'll describe that a little bit more as we talk a little bit more about the book. But the concept here is these principles do apply in most organizations.
That's great. So recently, Tracy, as I mentioned, you are the author of the book Magic here. And recently, this book was re-released. And there were some updates that were made to the book, as well as now put into audio form.
Right.
Let's talk a little bit about your experience in writing the book and why the updates. What is it that caused you to say, okay, we need to make some updates here? Let's talk about that for a minute.
Justin, what happened was in 2014 when we released this book, it was towards the end of the year, we decided we wanted to write a book to understand whether these figures that we just saw, those alarming statistics, were accurate. Do they actually reflect what's going on in the environment today? And so what we did was we gathered responses. When we originally wrote that book, we wrote it based on 14 million survey responses. Again, a huge data set. And what we were able to tell is that based on that data set, as well as the extensive research that we had done, the psychological literature, the employee engagement literature that was out there, basic engagement and motivation literature, we found that there were certain things that created engagement. And when we wrote that, basically what we found is that they come down to 5 basic components that we'll talk about a little bit later: meaning, autonomy, growth, impact, and connection. The title of the book, Magic, 5 Keys to Unlock the Power of Employee Engagement, is based on that acronym. We found that acronym to prove true, and we wanted to go back in and look at this again. So over the past 3 years, since 2014, what we've done is we've gone through and ran an additional about 10 million survey responses through this analytics. And as we did that, we found some more interesting things. Number one is that our data was clearly supported. But what I'd really like to do in the rest of the webinar is talk to you a little bit more about what some of this meant. Great. So we've updated some of the case studies that were in here. We also got quite a bit of request for an audio book. But the main purpose in doing this was to release some of the additional information that we found quite interesting. So let's cover that. Does that sound okay?
Perfect.
All right. So the first finding, we actually had 3 major findings as we went through over these last few years in this book. The first one is we learned what engagement really is. Okay, so when we go back and we look at that statistic, 7 out of 8 employees are disengaged, we can understand how they arrived at that. Basically what it was is on a 5-point scale, if I didn't consistently respond with a 5, those answers, 5 being yes, strongly agree, then I was included in the disengaged category. Now, here's the problem with that way of thinking. I look at my own job. I absolutely love my job. I've been here now for 16 years. And I love every bit of what we do. Now, if you were to ask me as I'm flying, one of the things I don't enjoy doing is flying on long trips, and I do that quite often. But I love my job. And you ask me on hour number 14 of a 15-hour flight how engaged I am right now. I heard it best as we were running engagement assessments for a large hospital organization, and one of the lead physicians said to me, this is like as I'm in the middle of a surgery and I have someone's chest open and I'm waking them up to find out how you feeling right now. The result's not going to be very positive. So one of the things we found with engagement was engagement is reflective of a longer term than a single question. Okay, so it's true that on hour 14 of that flight, I may not be fully engaged in my job. I might not like my job right then, but overall, I love what I do. So we looked really at what engagement is. And one of the things that we found, and this was actually confirmed from our first writing, was that employee engagement is an emotional state where we feel passionate, energetic, and committed to our work. Now, the reason I mention that piece is because there are 2 components of this. What we do is we fully invest our best selves, our hearts, spirits, minds, and the hands in the work that we do. So let's cover the first one. The first one is the concept of the heart. Okay, this is when I truly love my job. My heart is in my job is basically what that means. The next one is somewhat related to that, and that is the spirits. Now you walk into say a ball game, a basketball game, and you feel that team spirit that exists, that camaraderie, that excitement, that flame, that passion. That's the passion that exists with employee engagement. Now, what we've talked about to this point is feeling. We feel engaged. Now, this is where the problem comes in. We're seeing a lot of literature over the last little while, a lot of books, a lot of self-help books, a lot of academic research on happiness in organizations. In a couple issues ago in Harvard Business Review, there were quite a bit of discussion on workplace loneliness. And am I happy? And is there bullying that goes on at work? Certainly these things are inappropriate, bullying at work. But at the same time, what we're addressing is feeling. I can feel great at work and not do something. So the other part of engagement is we actually must do something. That's where we involve our minds. We start thinking about what we do at work. If I see something on the assembly line that doesn't make sense, I'm speaking up about it because my mind's involved in this. Then the last one is the actual physical part, meaning the hands and the doing piece of this. I contribute my hands. I'm actually physically doing something or mentally doing something to this effort. So engagement, one of the things we found is engagement is not happiness, nor is engagement satisfaction. We'll address that. Engagement involves 2 points. One is doing, the other is feeling. And up until now, engagement is focused, or the term engagement often has been focused on feeling, but feeling often doesn't do a whole lot for us in an organization. CEOs are not paying us to have employees feel great at their organization. That's fantastic because it results in doing many times, but not always.
And feelings can change on
Absolutely.
a whim, right? I mean, how my commute goes from my home to work can impact my feelings, right?
Just don't ask me about how I'm feeling on hour 14 of that flight.
That's right.
That's exactly right.
Great.
So that's one of the key insights that we learned. Here's what we've truly found. That when we look at an organization at any given time, about 30% of that population is what we call fully engaged. Fully engaged truly are those individuals who are dedicating their hearts, their minds, the spirit, the hands to the job that they do. It's there. They're engaged. They're fully likely to be making a very positive contribution at all times. A good portion of the organization, half, falls into the key contributor range. These are our strong and steadies. Yeah, Justin, these aren't the people we want to get out of the organization. This is where most people fit in an organization, somewhere in this. These are the people that aren't necessarily state engaged. By that I mean it doesn't vary from day to day. These are people who are generally engaged in what they do. Are they 100% there? No, not always, but we can't always expect that to be the case. So we add those two numbers up, and that's about 78% of your population we would define as engaged.
Yeah, far cry from
the seven
the
of eight that are disengaged. Yeah. That's exactly right. We also have our opportunity group. We call these our waiting to be engaged group. These are individuals that if this were a political poll, these would be our fence sitters. These could go, our swing vote could go either way. And at any given time, they may be very engaged in what they're doing or disengaged in what they're doing. And that varies quite a bit from day to day. That is only about 17% of our organization, Now with those folks, the key is how do we move them to the other piece?
So just really, really fast, Tracy, maybe I can connect the dots with our listeners today.
Please do.
A lot of times engagement is described in a binary fashion, right?
Exactly.
Engaged, not engaged. And one of the things that we found over the 20 years of doing employee engagement, employee type satisfaction type surveys is that there is a spectrum of engagement.
Exactly.
And that's what you're describing right here. It's not a binary, you are or you aren't, that there are different levels and people will move between those different levels.
Perfect.
And our job is to help them move from maybe an opportunity group to become a key contributor. And that's where we can really define success in improving engagement.
Exactly right. It is a continuum. It's not a binary piece. Again, there are parts of my job that I may not like. I don't like the travel piece of my job. There may be an individual that doesn't like the party atmosphere of their job or something along those lines. But all in all, they're quite happy with their jobs and they're engaged in their jobs. I'm going to address that fully disengaged party in just a minute. Is that okay?
That's perfect.
And the reason being is because I want to show you some interesting statistics. That we show that only about 4% of the organization is truly disengaged in their jobs. And the reason I want to wait for just a second is because I want to describe the difference between engagement and satisfaction. Now, we're talking about engagement. That's the willingness for the employees to give their hearts, spirits, minds, and hands. It's an emotional state to make something happen. But before we hit that, we have to hit what are called our satisfaction factors. We cannot engage until those satisfaction factors are met. And I want to describe what some of these satisfaction measures are. There's a gentleman by the name of Herzberg that came up with the concept of hygiene factors. And let's describe a hygiene factor. They're not typically what you think of brushing my teeth, etc. Hygiene factor are those parts of your job or parts of life that you don't really notice, meaning they don't cause me to be motivated or cause me to be engaged until they're not there. Okay, so I'll give you an example of this one. Safety. I rarely get excited to come to work because DecisionWise has great safe campus to work on, right? I don't know about you. Do you get excited about that?
No.
All right, so that's not an exciting piece. But we take that away,
Yep.
and all of a sudden you become very dissatisfied with your job. That's a hygiene factor. And actually, believe it or not, pay and benefits have been discovered to be hygiene factors, right? A simple increase in my pay of $500 or $1,000 or whatever that may be may have a temporary lift in my levels of motivation, but long term, that doesn't necessarily create motivation for me, nor does it create engagement. Now, take that away, and all of a sudden, that's a big problem.
It's a big problem, yeah.
These are what we refer to as hygiene factors. Now, where do perks fit into this? Perks are fantastic. I mean, all the way from nap pods to you walk my dog to whatever that may be. Awesome. Perks are great. But what we started to see is organizations try to out-perk the perkers, right? One of the things that Perks really does very well for us is help us with what we call the brand contract. And that's the subject of our employee experience book, the contracts that exist. A brand contract is an organization puts out a public face. And I join that organization because of that brand. Because they put out this face that this is what they do with the employees. They have an on-site gym. They have these perks. Pay is excellent. And it's a great way of attracting individuals. And for a short period of time, it's a great way of retaining individuals, but not in the long term. These are, again, what we refer to as hygiene factors. And they don't create engagement, although they do create satisfaction. I become satisfied with my job. When we're satisfied, basically what we're doing is fulfilling the basic requirements of the job. But my heart's not there, that passion's not there, I'm fulfilling requirements. But they must be in place to make it happen. Now, what happens is with this, we receive what we call MAGIC. Okay, MAGIC is an acronym, and I'm going to go through some of those points of that acronym here that stand for meaning, autonomy, growth, impact, and connection. What we found is that the degree to which these elements are present and the degree to which they match what the employees want is the degree to which that employee will engage in his or her role. Okay, so I'll give you an example. Justin, one of the things I know about you is that whether you profess to be this or not, you're a social person, meaning that you do a great job working with people. You like that connection that exists there.
Absolutely.
That for you is one of the engaging factors of your job, the ability to work with multiple people, to do things like we're doing today, etc. I enjoy people. But at the same time, that's not one of the primary motivators of what I do. I love the one-on-one relationships, but not large relationships. One of the biggest reasons I come to work is because I have autonomy. I have complete freedom to do what I want to do. Well, it's not, I have to operate within boundaries and rules, and part of that's because I'm the CEO of the organization. But at the same time, I have a lot of freedom in what I do. That's one of the primary reasons why I work here. So different people have different engaging keys that are more prevalent. However, the degree to which I can offer these in my organization is the degree to which employees are likely to engage.
That's great. One of the things I really like about the MAGIC model, Tracy, is that, like you say, different elements of MAGIC resonate with different people. And it doesn't mean to be engaged, it doesn't mean you need to have high levels of each one of these, but there needs to be components of that. And for me, connection is something that's really important. Autonomy as well is something I find those to be strong. Other things, does it matter as much? Not as much for me, but there are several in our organization that growth is really important to them. And so what really helps is we work with organizations and we use this framework, a common language where we can talk about these are the elements and individuals and managers have these aha moments to say, holy cow, It really is as simple as understanding what autonomy means. And we'll talk about that a little bit more, but this common language, this framework really makes it easy for people to understand. And it's simple in its simplicity.
You got it. Perfect. It used to be, and I heard this, it lessened starting about 3 years ago. But as I would work with an organization or coach an executive, I would hear this quite often. Well, such and such, so-and-so developer went down the street because she's making $10,000 more per year. Well, to an extent, that's very possible to believe. That's a satisfaction piece. But when we really dig into it, no, it's actually because she had growth opportunities or because she had the freedom to now work on some really cool stuff that she wanted to. What we're saying is that perks are often given as an excuse. Those satisfaction or hygiene issues, they're not meeting those. Well, they have to be in place, but they will leave faster for one of these opportunities than something else. Let's look at these one by one. The first one is meaning. Meaning is when your work has purpose beyond just the job itself. So it's not just the paycheck that I'm doing this for. There's a real reason. Here's where I find meaning in my work. I find it very meaningful to me to see an organization treat their employees the right way. That, to me, to be able to help that organization be better is very meaningful to me. It's also very meaningful to me as I work one-on-one with individuals, whether it's inside the walls of DecisionWise or with an executive or an individual I'm coaching, to see that individual move to the next level. That, for me, is very meaningful. That's how I find meaning. That's an example of where I don't come to work for my paycheck. I come to work for other reasons.
Yeah, and as we work with organizations around the world, this is something that comes up all of the time. Yeah. I know the acronym MAGIC, wordsmithing, whatever, but I love that it's first, because I see that when we work with these organizations, meaning is really important to almost every organization that we work with, and that the employees have to be able to find meaning in their job. And I know we'll talk a little bit about this more, but meaning is something that really starts at the top, but it goes down and it filters all the way to the individual level as well.
You got it. It's the why am I doing this? Mm-hmm. It is to answer the question why. And despite it fits obviously with the idea that we have them in order for a reason, meaning autonomy, growth. They spell magic rather than gamic or whatever. But the idea here is there's a real reason behind this. It is, if meaning does not exist for you in your role, you're very unlikely to engage in what you do. Let's look at the next one, and this one often gets confused. Autonomy is not anarchy. It's not complete freedom. Basically what it is the ability to look at your job and understand your boundaries, very clear set of boundaries, but then also understand where you're free to exercise within those boundaries. So autonomy is the power to shape your environment, your work in your environment in ways that allow you to perform at your best. Okay, so this is me understanding what my boundaries are and using my tools and what I've been born with, what I've developed in skills, etc., to be able to shape that environment in the way I choose to shape it, so long as I'm within the rules. Let me give you an example. I'm a jazz musician fan. I love jazz music. One of the reasons I like jazz so much is because it operates within a very clear structure. To the untrained jazz aficionado, you may not see this structure. Basically, it means I have a key signature I need to operate in, a key. I need to operate within, for example, 12 bars, which meaning 12 measures, and they need to repeat after that. There's a chord progression I must follow. Now, if I disobey any of those rules, my music sounds horrible, and mine always sounds horrible anyway. I'm a real hack that way. But if I operate within that, I'm free to what's called riff. I can move around all over within that, and that's where the best jazz music comes. That also applies to all types of music. The structure is there. So long as I operate within that structure, I have a lot of freedom to do some really cool things. That's autonomy.
Yeah, and oftentimes people think about autonomy as anarchy, right? And just do whatever you want, or always work from home. And I like the way you said it is that we have confinement, we have rules that we have to agree with, so that we want to find autonomy within those boundaries that we have.
You know what's interesting about this one is we talk to supervisors, we talk to employees who do not experience autonomy in their role. Quite often, it's not because they're not granted freedom. It's because they have not been given the boundaries. Mm-hmm. They don't know where their boundaries are because the manager has not been clear on what those look like.
Yeah, that's great.
Let's move to the next one, growth. Now, growth is an interesting one because what we're seeing right now is that this is a reason why individuals leave an organization more than any other. Let me explain what I'm talking about. A lot of this has been attributed to the millennial generation, the idea that what I'm after is to add bullet points to my resume. While I do believe that to some degree, I'm not one who labels a millennial generation as this is the way they are. One thing I do believe is that what you are looking for is growth. And the growth is often there, doesn't have to be in terms of advancement, but the opportunity to learn different things. We also have to remember that many millennials are coming out of school where they've been growing for the last 2 years or 18 months or last 4 years, whatever that may be. And so they're used to that as well, or high school or whatever that may be. And the idea that I need to be challenged and stretched is something that's very important to what they do.
That's great. So Tracy, when organizations think about growth, and we talk about growth is not always promotion,
right?
Talk through that a little bit more. What does that mean? Is it more education? Is it skill sets? What do you mean when you talk about growth there?
That's a question that I would refer back to you, and the reason why that is because it's so individualistic. To some people, growth may mean ascending up the corporate ladder. We actually find, and we've done a lot of research on this one, is that when we talk about growth, that's the first thing that comes to people's mind is promotion, adding a VP in front of your name or assistant or a senior or whatever that is. That's the first thing that comes to mind. But when we start asking more about it, it's what that title represents more than it is the title itself. And I want to be careful. This is not about giving someone a title. Mm-hmm. What it is about is giving people additional or challenging responsibilities that stretch them enough that they're being challenged. It's the challenge that they're after.
Great.
Think about the opposite of growth is. It's stagnation. If you think about a stagnant pool and the stagnation and it's the smell and everything else there says there's nothing going on. There's nothing lively. That's a disengaged environment. And that's the same thing that happens without growth.
Great.
We move on then next to impact. Now, meaning and impact are related. Let's remind you what meaning was. Meaning was when my work had purpose beyond just the job itself. Impact is seeing the positive and worthwhile outcomes of that work. So meaning is purpose. This is outcomes. This is results. Okay, so impact looks like this. If I'm constantly spinning my wheels, I'm the hamster in this perpetual cycle here, and I don't see impact, then why do it? And I soon lose meaning. So impact often destroys meaning and so forth. There are a lot of employees that simply don't see the meaning of their job. This is why measurement is important in an organization. It goes back to that idea of, if I were to go bowling and I had no idea how many pins I knocked down, I probably wouldn't bowl. First of all, I'm not a bowler anyway, but second of all, I wouldn't bowl for very long, right? So measurement becomes very important. I have to see the results of what I'm doing in order to feel engaged.
That's great.
I also want to mention, this is where the company's success also comes into play. If I'm an employee and don't understand where the company is succeeding, and all I do is I do my job and I go home at the end of the day, I don't see the outcome of that, I become disengaged as well. Yeah. If it looks like I'm just soldering something on an assembly line rather than seeing that actually what I'm doing is making a pacemaker, then I become disengaged. I have to see the end result.
Yeah, we always talk about here connecting the dots, and this is one
exactly
that really is about connecting the dots to help employees, to help managers really understand what the purpose of an organization is, what the purpose of what they're doing, really help them connect with what they're doing there.
Perfect. The final one, the C, so we've talked about meaning, autonomy, growth, impact, and now we're on connection. Connection is the sense of belonging to something greater than yourself. Connection happens in a lot of different ways. For many people, connection is a connection to the people that I'm working with. I just like the people I work with. That's one of the true blessings I have at working here is I have the ability to work with people I love. To me, it truly is a benefit or a blessing in my life. I love this because I like the people. So I'm connected to individuals within the organization. But connection can happen in other ways. I can be connected to the mission of the organization. Let's suppose I'm working for a nonprofit that helps provide shoes to people in Africa. All right? So I may be connected to that mission. It means something to me. Disney is a great example of this. The Disney employees don't become employees. They become cast members. They become integrated into that organization to the point that Disney is me and I am Disney. All right? So people who truly become connected to the organization become part of that organization, and the organization becomes part of me. Connection can happen to, for example, task. I'm connected to this task. There's a reason why I'm doing this task, and we all work together on it. And I am just so bought into this new release of this app that I'm going to do. I'm connected to it. I feel like I'm a part of it. And that's what connection is. When we lose connection, we feel like we don't belong in the organization anymore.
Yeah. Love that. And again, for me, this is one that's really, really important. And that connection with employees, with the organization, with our customers.
You got it.
Love that. In fact, just last night, I saw a news article that mentioned 3 of our clients in one article. And I was pumped. I'm like, hey, those are people that we work with. And I love that.
So your form of connection is with the company, with the clients that you work with, all kinds of connection. Yep. So just kind of again in summary, here's what we found in answer to the first question, what is engagement? And the answer to that is when these 5 elements are present, meaning autonomy, growth, impact, and connection, I am engaged in what I do. In order to make that happen, though, the satisfaction elements must be there. I can't do things to disengage people, but I also have to make sure those elements are present in what we do. So let's talk about the second thing we learned as we went through this and continued our writing in this book. We learned that the role of manager is an important one in terms of engagement, but it was different than we thought it was going to be. And so we had to ask ourselves the question, what really is a manager's role in creating engagement? Do they have a role? And what we would intuitively think is that a manager has direct impact on an employee's engagement. So as we started our research, that was our hypothesis. A manager plays a critical role in that employee's engagement. And we had always heard something that was kind of interesting that we'd always actually preached as well. And that is people join companies, but they quit managers. You ever heard that?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
There have been times that I think I have made that decision.
I have probably said that many. You've made the actual decision.
I've actually made the decision.
Are you telling me something?
No,
okay.
not here.
Good. Thank you. All right. I appreciate that. But I've actually said this many times as well. People have joined companies, but quit managers. We had to look at that, and is that fact or fiction? The answer to that, based on our research, was it's fact. It is. People join companies, they quit managers, with a very large ... but. Let's talk about what that means here over the next little bit. So remember, we're trying to answer the question, what role does a manager play in engagement? So what we did last year is we took 215 work groups from various companies, and we wanted to understand whether that manager, if that manager was engaged, would that impact the person's engagement with whom that manager worked? All right, so you're my boss. We have 5 people in this room. You are our supervisor. What we did, first of all, was we looked at your level of engagement based off our employee surveys. And we determined that you are a highly engaged individual. You're fully engaged. What we did then was we looked at that and said, now, does that impact my engagement? Does that impact our production crew's engagement, et cetera? And we said, does that relate? Then we also looked and said, all right, let's suppose you're disengaged. What effect does that have or impact does that have on your team? And we saw some very interesting statistics or figures that came out of here. Now, we had a lot of people that were involved here. Now, remember, these are managers, so these represent a fairly large population. And we looked at those that are fully engaged. So on the left-hand side there, you see fully engaged, and you see a bunch of the bars that are there. Now, what we're also doing is the colors represent from left to right. We have our fully engaged, we have our key contributors, our opportunity group, and then our fully disengaged employees. Now, notice what those numbers represent. Okay, so what we're doing is we're taking, first of all, a look at the fully engaged manager. This was you in that scenario I just gave. And we're looking at that person's employees. We're looking at your employees. A fully engaged manager, 36% of their employees were also fully engaged. 48% of their employees are engaged. Mm-hmm. They're engaged employees, right? So these are our people who are our key contributors. We had 12% of those that fall into the opportunity group, and about 3% of those employees were fully disengaged in their jobs. Then we took the key contributor. So a manager, let's suppose you were a key contributor. Mm-hmm. We looked at your direct reports. And what we found is that, notice how that number has dropped in the number of engaged employees, fully engaged. It's gone from 36% for a fully engaged manager to 24% for a key contributor. And key contributor has gone up. So I'm kind of replicating your behavior a little bit. This is an effect that in psychology is called emotional contagion. Okay, the idea that basically your level of engagement is contagious with other people. Notice what happens as we look at the green in that area. That's 20%. Okay, so these are our opportunity group has gone up quite a bit. And then also our disengaged employees has gone up by 2%. We also see this with opportunity group. Notice the number of fully engaged people has dropped way down to 14%. And we're starting to see a rise in our opportunity group again. I'm mimicking you if you're an opportunity group manager, and the number of disengaged has gone up. And notice that our fully disengaged employees are about the same. So our apathetic manager, those who are in the opportunity group and fully disengaged, have apathetic employees. So the question we were trying to answer, does your level of engagement as a manager dictate or reflect on my level? And the answer to that is yeah, to some degree. Let's look at our findings. The first one was this: engaged managers are more likely to have engaged employees. All right, so fact, confirmed.
Yep.
Let's look at the next one. The next one says simply being engaged as a manager doesn't directly impact engagement, meaning just the fact, and this was what was really interesting, just the fact that there's correlation doesn't mean there's causation. Meaning if you are an engaged manager, just because you're engaged doesn't mean I'm going to necessarily be engaged. Okay? Statistically speaking, there's not a one-to-one correlation all the time. But, and this is the important point, engaged managers, because they are engaged, are more likely to create an environment in which others will choose to engage. Not simply because of affect, meaning that you're a happy person, an engaged person, will I engage, but because you are engaged, you're more likely to do things and care about things that will also engage other employees.
That's great. Tracy, were some of these results a little surprising to you? Kind of change up the way you were thinking a little bit?
Yes, and part of the reason is because, so we remember going back to the concept of people join organizations and leave managers. They do leave managers, but it's not because of the manager being engaged or disengaged. In fact, we saw a lot of examples where a manager had checked out, and partly because that manager checked out, employees engaged. They realized they had to pick up the slack and make some things happen. But what we did learn very clearly is if you are an engaged manager, you will probably be doing things that create an environment in which others choose to engage.
Yeah, I love that create the environment. And that's really important that an environment exists. I think sometimes when we do engagement surveys and it's all about just measure, we need to understand the purpose of that measurement is to understand the environment that's being created.
Exactly.
Because it's in that environment that people can choose to be engaged or what levels of engagement they want to be in.
I appreciated you using the word choose. One of the final things we're going to talk about is engagement as a choice. All the manager can do is really create that environment. And an engaged manager is likely to create an environment in which people may choose to do that. But all that manager can do is choose to help create an environment in which employees can choose to engage. That actually brings up our next point, and the final thing that we learned as we went through this additional research to re-release the book. The book was re-released in January of this year, and then audiobook about, 2 weeks ago, I think it was. And this was one of the key pieces that we found that is not really spelled out much in what we've been able to review in the literature. Not many people are talking about this, that engagement is actually a competency. Okay, let's remember what a competency is. A competency is a behavior and a skill combined, so basically it's an ability to do something. Now, it's both being engaged, so I can actually build my own competency in being personally engaged, and also in creating engagement. So I can learn a competency or a skill in helping others become engaged as well. I can't choose for them, but it is helping them. So managers, one of the things we learned is that managers do have a direct impact because they have a competency in this area, both in terms of they have learned to engage and they have learned to help create environments in which others choose to engage. Competencies can be learned, taught, measured, matched, and improved upon. Therefore, if engagement is a competency, I can actually learn how to create engagement.
Great. So just to make sure everyone's on the same page.
Yes.
What are some other manager or leadership competencies that we often see that where this would fall in line with those types of competencies?
Good question. One of those would be, so for example, if I'm a manager who has, or a leader has the ability to be clear about vision, that ability to communicate the vision is a competency. I have a competency in communication. I have a competency in creating the vision and moving forward with that vision. Now, one of the things we learned is that what that does is now that employees know that vision, then they're more likely to engage in a vision. It's hard to engage in something you don't know if it exists.
Yeah.
So by that, what I'm talking about, I'm drawing some correlations. One is that is actually one of the competencies a manager can learn to help with his or her own engagement competency. But it's also a parallel, meaning similar to my ability to communicate is my ability to engage as well. That's a competency. Yeah. It's an ability.
That's great. And I think this is really powerful because where there's a competency, we can have accountability.
Yes.
We can have learning and development. We can have training. We can have all of those things because some people have natural gifts. They have inclinations toward that. Others might not, but it's something that can be taught. It's something that can be learned. And we can be held accountable for how we act or react in those
Perfect.
areas.
Yeah, let's look at this in terms of magic for a second. If I'm a manager and I have a competency in engagement, meaning that's a skill for me, I can help engage. I'm not talking about motivate. I'm talking about engage individuals. I can create that environment. I may look at you and I may say, well, Justin has a strong desire, a strong need for one of our magic keys, which is connection. Mm-hmm. So first of all, I recognize that in you. And second of all, if I'm competent as a manager in engagement, I will work to create an environment in which you can use that engagement, that connection. I can create that for you, and I can help you create that. That's a competency. But here's where we've really messed up as organizations over the last 5 years. With this proliferation of literature and ideas and articles and speeches about engagement, what's happened is that we're no longer treating engagement as a competency. We're treating engagement as a feeling. So it's about being happy. It's about not feeling lonely. It's about loving my job. But we forgot the other half of the equation, which is, yeah, but I still want you to perform. And what's happened is the reason why we've dug into this a lot more is our CEOs are coming back to us saying, you're right. We have to create that environment that brings happy employees. They have to feel great. They have to feel engaged. But bottom line is I'm not running an organization so that I can have happy employees. I want that, both ethically, morally, and the fact that it creates they're better workers. Mm-hmm. But I also have to have their hands and their minds in this as well. And we're forgetting that. The other piece that we're forgetting is this basic concept that we learned here, which is who owns engagement. As we look at this in terms of ownership on the left and time, it used to be, 50 years ago that the employee was 100% responsible for their engagement, right? If you didn't like your job, good luck finding another job. And what shifted over the last, I would say even 10 years, but beyond that, is now the organization, it seems, has believed that they need to take on the responsibility for that engagement, right? So I throw perks at the equation, which we know doesn't necessarily work. I am responsible for my employee's growth. I am responsible for helping my employee find meaning in his or her job. There's some problems with that. First of all, you can't do that. And second of all, employees are not after us to own their engagement. It's a choice. So let's explore that a little bit further because I know this may be a complicated concept. And I'll tell you why that doesn't work. So if I'm an employee and I'm now to the idea that your job is to engage me, okay, I work for this company. This company's responsibility is to make me happy, to make sure I have connection in my job, and it's the employer's responsibility to do that. Now, notice, many of the articles and the speeches and things that we're hearing are geared towards this. Mm-hmm. You as an organization own that. Here are some problems with that. Here's the first one. These were some really interesting facts. Remember I told you I was going to go back to that concept of the disengaged employees? These truly disengaged employees are unlikely to be making a positive contribution. In fact, they're likely to be making a negative contribution. They're cancerous. It spreads. So my disengagement, as I do an employee survey and I sit down with the team and I see that their disengaged employees have increased, maybe from 5% to 7%. Yeah, that's only a 2% decrease in overall engagement. But the thing I'm worried about is what's happened is this cancerous view has started to spread. Mm-hmm. And then it spreads and it multiplies and it many, many times over. And so I know that if that trend is happening, that it's likely to continue unless something is done about it. So many of the managers say, well, we need to work on finding ways to engage those employees. And what I look at is the research that we've shown. This is through what we call, and when we run an employee survey, we do what we call an engagement migration analysis, right? Many of our clients like this because what they're able to do is see what happens to that particular person over a period of time. So I can look at your survey results. So let's suppose I'm running a survey for your organization, Justin. I can look at you by way of an employee number. So I don't know who you are, but you've been assigned a number. And I can track your number for 3 or 4 years as we administer that survey. And I can see what happened to you in terms of your engagement over a period of time. Not you as Justin, but you as employee number 1748. Mm-hmm. And I look at employee 1748 and see that in the second year, this employee is disengaged. Well, what this is showing is we track you over a period of time that less than 5% of disengaged employees move from disengaged to engaged in that same organization. What does that tell you?
You're disengaged. You're just that's where you're at. Not a lot you can do.
No. So the best thing for me to do as a manager is not to spend 80% of my time trying to engage you. It's to
help you find something else.
Help you move you on.
Yep.
Yeah, engage you out the door.
That's right.
And I don't mean that coldly, but the truth of it is you're likely to stay and corrupt the organization. Mm-hmm. Now, here's what's also funny about disengaged employees. They do stay because they're going to go somewhere else and be disengaged as well, likely. That's interesting. They stick around and they do corrupt. And so sometimes the organization simply has to move on those.
Yeah, the HR folks on the line with us right now, they're in their head. They're like, yep, there's this person and this person. I know exactly who they are.
Yeah. And the question often comes to me when that scenario is brought up is, well, do I fire someone because they're disengaged? No, obviously not. But the disengaged employees are typically not making a positive contribution either. And you know who those are, and you know the disadvantage of having them in the organization. So that's interesting. Here's another interesting piece that we found, and we've not published these yet because we're getting additional information that it's really supporting these ideas. 18% of employees who are disengaged in one organization engage in the next organization. So look at the inverse of that, or the converse of that, meaning that you still have about 82% of your employees that move from one organization to the next, and they're always going to disengage.
Yeah.
That tells you something about that individual versus tell you about the organization, right?
Sure does.
Yeah. Let's look at the next one. This one I thought was intriguing. So the idea that I'm disengaged because of my manager, so I say it's my boss. I'm disengaged because of my boss. Okay. Well, less than half of employees who attribute their disengagement to their boss re-engage when that boss is replaced. So I'm your boss, let's suppose, and you just say, I just can't engage because of my boss. He's horrible. And I leave. I get fired or whatever that is. Less than about half the time, you'll start to engage again. But the other half the time is you won't engage. Yeah. So the idea of blaming it on the boss cuts it about half the time, but still that other half the time doesn't hold water.
That competency that needs to be learned or retrained, right? We've got to refocus somebody's effort, retrain their behavior in that.
Perfect. They need to re-engage. Yep. They need to learn to re-engage, not because of what the organization has done. Here's the last one, and this has come based on a recent Harvard study over the last 6 months. It says that when an employee quits their job and is talked into staying, so we have this employee that comes and says, hey, I found a job with this other organization, and I say, well, how about if I give you a corner office and I give you $10,000 more a year? She will likely leave within the next year. In fact, probably within the next 6 months, but between 6 months and 18 months, that employee is quite likely to leave. So it tells us some interesting things about an organization's control or ability to impact someone's engagement. So based on this stuff, what are you pulling out of here? How would you interpret this data?
Well, that it's not just the organization's responsibility as often we think, right? That it is a two-way street when it comes to engagement.
Exactly right. And that's what we end up here with is the concept that engagement is a 50-50 proposition. Remember what engagement is. Engagement is the heart. So first of all, I can't be in control of your heart. I can give you some areas in which you can have, you can love your job, and I can help create that. But ultimately, I am not responsible for or control your heart. And if the employee thinks that that's the case, and they're waiting for me to give you that heart, I can't give that to you. So that's part of the reason why it's 50-50. The next one is that passion. I as an organization or I as an employer can help you with that passion and help give you an environment in which you choose to have that passion, but ultimately that passion depends on you. Then the next part of this is where I do have some control. I can have a little bit of control over not your thought process, but getting your ideas. I can put things in place such as processes, procedures, forums, things like that, where we can exchange ideas, and I can put that in place, and I can use a little bit of that, and I can help control some of that. But ultimately, you're the one that decides when you see that bad product or customer service that may not work very well, whether or not you want to correct that or not. That's your mind. Whether or not you want to bring innovation forward, that's partly your mind as well as the environment I create. Then the last one is the hands piece. This is you actually physically doing something. Yeah, I do have a lot of control over that. And this is where performance reviews come in. I have a lot of control over the performance review to be able to say you're doing it or you're not doing it. And that's the hands piece. But notice that a good portion of that even depends on you. So what we're saying here is if the organization is saying, I control your engagement and continues to put forward all kinds of perks and things like that, it's not doing a whole lot. My responsibility as an organization or as a manager is to create the environment in which you can choose to engage. That's done by providing as much as I can with these magic factors, meaning, autonomy, growth, impact, and connection, and making sure all the satisfaction elements are there. Taking away the things that will demotivate you or cause that to happen. But it's up to you and by the way, as a manager, I can learn a competency in that area. I can learn the things to do to make that happen. I can learn, for example, how to have, we call these engagement interviews. I can learn how to sit down with you and have the conversation of, tell me about what a good day at work looks like for you. I can teach you these skills. They can be learned. What I can't teach you is to you yourself be engaged, and that's your choice.
Tracy, this is fantastic stuff. Thank you so much for sharing this, the concepts of magic. Really, as I mentioned, it's really simple. It's a common language that an organization can put in place to discuss. I got a text message the other day from a university that was teaching this to their students and teaching these simple concepts of engagement using the magic model, and how powerful that is to say, look, this is an easy language that resonates with everyone. So thank you so much for being here.
Pleasure.
A couple of things for those who are on the line with us. DecisionWise has a magic self-assessment where you can go in and see how engaged you are. This is a free survey that you can go on and take at the website engagementmagic.com. It can also be found on the DecisionWise website under the organizational tab. You can find that as well. But simply put, engagementmagic.com. Scroll down a little bit. You can find the magic self-assessment.
I believe that takes between 8 to 10 minutes to take.
And you walk through that and you'll see over on the right-hand side, it will show you your different components, how engaged you are, where you are with different things, and so really fun. It's something that as a manager could do with his or her employees,
sure.
and have a facilitated conversation with. If you want to understand more how your organization works with magic, DecisionWise can help with large-scale surveys or talk you through those different things as well. So, any thoughts, Tracy, on the self-assessment with that?
That's just a fun little piece, but it also is very valuable to help understand yourself, but also, as you mentioned, to have a conversation with that manager about, here's what I'm getting and what I'm not getting, and here's how you can help me, and here's how I commit to help myself.
Great. So lastly, the book Magic can be found on Amazon. All of these will have both the physical and the audio. I guess iTunes and Audible don't have the physical books, but you can get the physical books or the audio book through one of these great retailers. And so we encourage you.
We love reviews, whether good or bad. We love to have reviews on there so people can understand what they're reading.
That'd be great. The last thing that we have a couple of questions. I have a couple of minutes. So there will be a transcript of this. Both this webinar will be on demand that you can watch again, as well as it will be in the DecisionWise podcast, and you will receive links to both of those as we send those out with the HRCI and SHRM credit codes, so that you have that information there.
Could you describe those credit codes for those who don't understand how that works, just very quickly?
So those of you who have the SHRM certification and the HRCI certification, these are credit hours that you can obtain, and DecisionWise DecisionWise is certified with both organizations to provide these, and this training accounts for 1 credit hour of recertification.
Thank you.
Okay. The last thing, we have a question about engagement and the employee experience, and we really don't have a lot of time to go into that in great detail. I will just quickly say that employee engagement is part of the employee experience. We have a lot of research on our and information on our website about that. Also, the book that Tracy has co-authored called The Employee Experience really dives into how does the employee experience relate to Magic and the components of employee engagement.
Very good. Justin, thank you for your time today. Team, I appreciate it. Thanks for this opportunity, and especially to those who are listening.
Thank you so much.